you guys already haven't met Andy Cuccia, he's known as Cooch. He's going to talk to you guys about the Delta. He's going to open it up for questions. He's really going to talk about what's going on right here, right now, so you guys can hopefully apply that for tomorrow. Everybody, Andy Cuccia.
All right.
Thank you, John. Welcome to California's island in the sun, huh, guys? I hear fishing was a little tough out there today. Who's leading this event? Where's he at? You are a stud. He's a stud, really. The birthday boy's a stud. What'd you have for weight?
It was 11.6.
Okay.
11.7.
Just a little over 2 pound average.
Yeah.
That's pretty doggone good for being on this island right now. And that actually, guys, right now on the river, for those of us that aren't running 30, 40 miles away from here, that's a fair limit for this time of year. And it's pretty much what you're going to expect across the board for everybody. And there are a bunch of reasons why, and I'm going to kind of go into those. Why we're in the conditions that we're at right now, because we've got some very strange conditions for this time of year. We've got a lot more wind going on out here right now, which I know has just got to be miserable for you guys because you're probably all stuck behind the docks, okay? You know, unfortunately, that's just not the place to be on this island right now, okay? But you have to deal with what you got to deal with. And we'll talk a little bit about maybe some things that you can try and do. I know you got to be real conscious of the homeowners and their property and so forth, so you're kind of limited to kind of getting behind them and between them. But we've had a very strange season out here on this river, and that's all because of our weather patterns that have been coming through, and we haven't had an extended long period of time all spring, especially in March and April, where we had 7, 8, 9, 10 days of solid, constant, calm, stable weather. We haven't had it. Okay, and we probably haven't had many more than 4 or 5 days in a row. And the biggest problem that we've been up against is the coolness in that weather. Okay, if we had breezes like this and it was 75 to 90 degrees outside in March and April, we'd have had a normal year. We'd be smoking fish and we'd be all over those post spawners right now, and the topwater bite would be off the hook. But that didn't happen. What happened was we had 58 to 65 degree weather almost all spring long. The water temperature out there on that river really never got above 65 degrees, and as a matter of fact, a week and a half ago it was still at 67 degrees at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We launched the boat, it was 62 in the morning, and we just don't see that in July. I mean, normally that water temperature is 71, 72, 73 this time of year. And what that did with these fish is these bass want to move up shallow to spawn. They couldn't. They were moving up shallow. There would be these great waves. We were out there spanking them, and all of a sudden, we got this cold weather. It got cold up shallow, and zoom, right back out into the deep grass beds they went, and they disappeared. The next 3 days, we couldn't find them and couldn't catch them. And we've been up against that all year. Well, they've got this natural instinct. They want to move up in the spring, and they want to do that one thing that's, you know, their basis in life, and that's getting up and spawning and getting up into the shallow waters. And, you know, this whole island area inside of Frank's Tract, there probably are more fish right now in this lake than anywhere else on the Delta. Okay, anywhere else on the Delta, the concentration of fish that live in this lake, this flooded lake, is greater than anywhere else in the Delta. It would amaze you, the colonies of bass, and not just small bass and medium-sized bass, but large bass. There's a lot of those fish in that 9 to 14 pound range out there in that tract. And I think what a lot of people misunderstand, because this is such a shallow fishery, is that they live way out in the middle in the grass beds, okay, out in the middle of the tract. And you know, there's probably a small group that do, but the largest concentration of those fish live inside this 5 mile-an-hour zone in that deep, low current water areas, okay? And what happened this year, and a lot of times what those fish are doing is they're migrating through all the openings. As the water temperature starting to come up, they're coming up out of those areas where you got these tule islands, you got all these deep breaks and ledges down on these tule islands on the inside of the levee. You got all these deep water channels that are running, boats have gone through for years, out on the ends of the docks. A lot of these fish, these bigger fish and the large concentrations of fish around this island, and I'm talking all the way around Taylor too. It's not just specifically here, but this stretch here all the way down to the back of Sand Mound, these fish tend to stay out in the middle of that 5-mile-an-hour zone. And what happens when you go out there and typically see where most of the bass fishermen are fishing on this island? They're up in between the docks, or they're on that tule island flipping and pitching and throwing frogs and doing everything right on the island. And their boat is sitting 15 feet off the bank. Guess what? They're sitting right on top of the fish. They're sitting right on top of the massive majority of fish this delta has. And nobody knows it. And they're right there underneath them. Next time you get an opportunity in the coming weeks to get out here on a low tide, and you could probably even do this tomorrow morning, when that tide drops out, you can go down to that opening down here at the wall in front of Sugar Barge. You go right out in front of Sugar Barge, 35 feet from that opening where all that water comes. You come 25 feet off the bank on a low tide, and look what you see down there in 12 foot of water. You will be shocked. There are craters and areas where these bass got in and spawned in that deep water that nobody even knew about. Okay? The same thing happened out here in the middle. In the last couple of years, we've begun to see all these boats out in the middle of Frank's Track. Okay? In 7, 8, 10 foot of water in the big grass beds, because the fish are spawning out there now. And the reason is because they're forced to. They have no choice. They can't get up into shallow water and where it's nice and calm, 68, 72, 73 degrees. They're forced to have to deal with what they're presented with. So they have spawned way out of their normal places this year. Granted, we've had some fish in the shallow areas that have come up and spawned, but they've been mostly those mid-range fish, okay? But not the big giants, not the 4 to 11, 12 pounders in the mass concentrations we normally see them. I don't know if any of you guys saw my video last year when I was out with Doug Watson, and we did a Senko video on westernbass.com, and we were over here at the wall fishing them Senkos when them fish were up there in April. And that week I had 5 guide trips out. We never had a day for 7 fish that we had a limit under 70 pounds. Not one day, for 4 days straight, not one day. It was totally amazing. And we probably could have had multiple limits over 40 pounds every day. Multiple limits, okay? Because they were all able to move up shallow and spawn right in amongst all the tules and the walls and 10 to 15 feet out. Well, we didn't get that this year. They all spawned out there, and they all spawned right in the middle of this channel here. And you can tell by going out, you'll see, you know, in February and March, you'll go out there and you look around in these areas where these fish are spawning, you'll see this dark silted bottom, okay? And you'll see the grass growing everywhere. Well, when you move into an area and all of a sudden you start to see yellow bottom, now you're seeing where those bass have come in and started fanning, okay? And this is what you're seeing out in the middle of the track. These colonies of fish are coming out and they're just and they're spawning out there. All along here, we didn't start to see those massive shallow spawning beds up against the wall and in the tules till the bluegills moved in and started cleaning all that stuff out. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing the bass come in that are feeding on the bluegills. Okay, they haven't come into the shallows to spawn. They're now done spawning and have come in to start feeding on the bluegills. So what you really got to concentrate on right now, because these fish are in that post-spawn summer transition, okay, they're actually out there feeding pretty heavily. The problem is catching them when they're feeding. And that has been, over the last 4 weeks, a very difficult task, because especially on a day-to-day, because again, we're having this kind of stuff. I was out on when was I out? I was out on Thursday. It was dead calm. And it was the first day in a month that we didn't have the air conditioning coming over the top of the mountains here, okay? And typically that's my gauge out here in the summer, whether I'm going to have a good topwater bite in the morning or not. If I see the fog creeping up over the top of the hills here, I know my topwater bite in the morning is going to be just dead. It's too cold. The air temperature overnight has dropped. Those fish aren't going to move up in that shallow water first thing in the morning and be real active when that air temperature is 66, 67, 68 all night long. It cools that shallow water off way too fast, okay? And in a bass, these bass in this river, they don't handle temperature change well at all, especially when it's dropping. They get into a comfort zone, okay? Water temperature 65, 66, 67, and all of a sudden it starts dropping 62, 63, 64. They just freak, and they just get out there in the grass and suspend and do absolutely nothing until the water temperature starts coming up. And that's what we're seeing now. We have seen, I don't know how many of you had temperature gauges on your boats out there today, but you're probably looking at about 70, 71 right now maybe. Did anybody have temperature gauge? Is that about what you found out there? I mean, you found some 73-degree water, you know, I mean, and that's pretty good right now because it hasn't been over 70 degrees up until last week. And it got real hot for about 3 or 4 days, and then we've had the wind, but it's been warm throughout the nights. And that's what we need to turn that shallow topwater bite on that we're not seeing right now because it got cool again 2 days ago. Friday morning the fog crept in. This morning the fog crept in. So that's why you guys aren't catching a lot of topwater fish. And probably what's happening for those of you that are throwing topwater is you're getting that occasional roll up and slap and they're missing it. How many of you experienced that? Okay? They're just not committing. I mean, they're just like, get out of here. Okay? And they're not eating it because they're just not in that real aggressive mode because it's real cool. So one of the things that I can suggest to you right now, for first thing in the morning, no matter where you go out here, if you see that fog sitting out there first thing in the morning, it's probably not the greatest idea to start off with topwater. Okay? Start off with one of them little swim baits. Any guys out there throwing them little small swim baits? The river to sea in the storms? Okay? You can get out and throw those things on the edges and outsides of the docks. The same ones you use up at Clear Lake. Anything that's kind of a shad color with a little bit of yellow in it, you're going to catch the fish on those. And the reason you're going to catch them on those is because the shad are now moving into spawn. You guys seeing the small schools of shad starting to show up? Little itty bitty ones, okay? Those are the spawning, those are the shad that have come in and they're spawned on the outside of the grass, and now the little guys, you know, those hatchers, they're starting to show up. And the more and more we get of those, the more and more those bass are going to start moving up on those grass edges and being right on the outside of the grass lines. So that's the other thing that you can look for. If you find an area where you've got those schools of those baby shad swimming around, you know, where they're 1/8 of an inch to an inch long at the most, okay, you're going to find some bass in that area, okay? If you see those shad in a long line and stream, okay, there's probably not any bass right around. If you see them in a ball, if you see them darting, okay, there's bass around. Don't leave. Work the area. Okay, work that area. Do whatever you can. If you got an anchor and have to drop an anchor, try and drop an anchor to stay on them, because they're going to be feeding bass, eating on those shad. Okay, they may not be really big bass because they're small baits, but you're going to find, that's one thing that you can key on out here through here. You find that shad that are in balls or scattering and darting everywhere, you're going to find active bass that you can catch doing that. The other thing that I probably would recommend is, you know, instead of trying to get behind the docks, try and park yourself between the docks in the openings, okay? Instead of concentrating from the back of the docks to the back, okay? Get that boat of yours turned around out in the main channel and cast out in the middle of that main channel and work it back to you. And sit there, pull up like you do on a point on a lake, okay? Just fish this place exactly the same way you do on a lake, okay? Because a bass is a bass. Doesn't matter whether he's on this river or whether he's on a lake. He's got certain natural tendencies, and that is that they like structure and they like cover, okay? We don't have a lot of structure on this river like we do on a lake, and structure and cover are two different things, okay? Structure is the contour of the bottom, changes in the bottom. A drop from 1 foot to 3 feet, that's a structural change, okay? A ledge, an opening. You've got the openings out here in Frank's track that take you out in the middle where you got a point here and a point here. Don't overlook fishing those points. You can sit on those points all day long and catch a 12-pound limit right now. Every single one of those points and openings, if you sit there and absolutely don't move all day long, I guarantee you, you'll catch a 12-pound limit. But you can't move. If you start to drift off and go this way, now you've come away from that strike zone, that dining room table where that occasional 2.5, 3 pounder is going to come up there looking for something to eat. Okay, and if you're over here 35 feet away, you've missed him. He's not going to come over here to eat. He's going to come right up on that point because that's where he goes to eat every single day. Okay, and periodically you may have 40 fish do that in a day. Sometimes you'll get 3 or 4 of them that'll move up once and it'll be bang, 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 and then all of a sudden it just dies. You go, ah, they're not biting, they're not here anymore. Next thing you know, you're 35, 40 feet down the bank looking for the next point. Don't do that. Turn around and go over to the other point and fish that one. Sit on that one for an hour and then come back to this one. Okay? But don't leave those points. You get on a point. I mean, there's 30 of you. You could put 2 guys on every point. There's 4 guys on every point. And you guys are going to catch fish. Okay? You stick up underneath those docks. You're not going to see weights much more than what you caught today. Okay, you're not going to have the opportunity because those better quality fish just aren't there. Okay, the other thing is you have to understand all along this island that grass bed comes way out from underneath those docks out into the middle. It's huge, it's deep, it's cool, there's no current down there, and those bigger fish love it. Okay, and they love eating big worms down there, big plastic worms. Okay, you could put on a 6 or 7 inch curly tail black and chartreuse, a June bug, or a margarita mutilator, or something, anything black and purple. You can even go with an earth tone one, something like an S20 type worm, green weenie or something, but something that's got a big moving tail. Okay, put a 1/4 ounce weight. Put something real heavy on there. Don't try and get out there and fish with a light tackle because between the current and the wind, you being down low in that little boat, you're going to struggle. You guys probably know this. I probably don't have to tell you, but you need to get heavier weight because you need to get down and punch through that grass. If you got too light a weight, you're going to throw it up in there, and that bait's not going to get down to where the fish is. That grass bed down there is 7 feet deep. Okay, you may be in 10 foot of water and you can see 3 feet underneath you the grass line. There's another 6 to 7 feet below that grass. Okay, and you need to get down inside that grass to catch those fish because that's where they're at. If you're sitting there fishing and and the drop shot's kind of the same way, I don't think with that lighter weight you can always get it down to those fish. Okay, if you're fishing the outside edge of it where you got some deeper water and you can see the holes in the pockets, a drop shot's a fairly decent technique. Okay, but right now here you're not going to catch a lot of good quality fish with that drop shot. Okay, get on those bigger, heavier Texas rigs. Okay, sweet beavers. You get a sweet beaver down there, guy, they're going to eat it. Okay, any one of those colors, it really doesn't matter. Day to day, they'll eat one of them. Just keep rotating through the different colors. One of the ones that's been working best for me in my guide trips out here has been that oxblood one. Okay, that oxblood's been working real good in that grass. When I get on the rocks, okay, those greener, purple June bug, mossy ones, that smoke one with the purple kind of flake in it works real well. And then the one that's that, what do they call it, the magic craw, it's got the kind of the green and a little bit of blue hue in it, okay, magic swirl, okay. Those two work really well up on the rocks, but unfortunately, the rocks that we have, and you guys can go walk all along this bank all the way down to Russo's, okay, and look up in the shallow areas along the rocks, you're not going to see a lot of bass up there. They're just not there. But there are a couple of areas, especially on some of these breaks that you see out here, where there's a pole. Okay, anywhere you find a pole, there's a rock pile underneath that pole and a drop off. Okay, those crawdad color baits will work extremely well around those kind of areas on that sweet beaver. Don't overlook fishing those poles. Even the ones that you see out here along this levee, when you come up to a dock and you've got a great big pole on the outside edge, look for the grass pockets around that pole and fish those holes around that grass pocket and that pole and keep that bait in there. That you can do effectively with the drop shot. Okay, but again, if you're using a real light weight, you may not be getting down to the bottom of where you may only be getting down 5 or 6 feet when you need to be getting down 7 or 8 feet. Okay, in a lot of cases. So you can try that if you're stuck and the wind forces you in there. That's what you really want to do. But get into some of those bursts and cast out into the middle. You're going to find you're going to catch a lot better quality fish out in the middle than what you are in the backs and behind those docks. If the wind's not blowing, it opens up a whole lot of different things that you can do. And depending on where you're at located in here, you can get behind some of these levees too. And I don't know how far you guys are able to travel out of here up this way towards Little Franks. Does anybody try to get up towards Little Franks? I mean, do you have the oomph and the gas to get all the way up there? There's some rock walls up and through there beyond those house docks where there's a lot of good fishing up in that area, and you got more of those rocky ledges and breaks where you've got current coming across them, and those fish are on the back side. Okay, they're on the back side of the current. Depending on whether the current's coming down or whether the current's going back out, those fish are just repositioning, and they're down in about 12 to 13 foot of water. Okay, and what I have found the last week, and I went right back to it. I've been trying to force feed them jigs and so forth. I've just gone to my standard half-ounce jig, and I went to that 164 grub, and we started catching fish. And we started catching fish in those rocks. I'm using a half-ounce jig down in 12 to 16 foot of water. Okay, but you've got to go that way quite a ways. Now, the other thing that you can do with this thing is that on the breaks of these islands that are out here on the opposite side of the docks, where you've got the islands out in the middle, okay, there are a lot of breaks and ledges that are 10, 15 feet away from where the actual tules touch the water. A lot of us want to get in the habit of pitching right into the tules and dropping it down, hopping, picking up and going to the next one. We're missing the fish, guys. Okay, the fish are 10, 15 feet out the bank, right underneath your boat. There's a bunch of drop-offs and ledges down there and nooks and crannies that those fish are hanging out in, and you're missing them. Okay, they'll take this bait down there. They'll also take that big Senko down there if you got the patience to let it get there. Okay, Senko's really difficult to fish out there in that area when you've got that current and wind. Because you're talking 10, 12 foot of water. It's real difficult in the wind, especially in a smaller boat when you got an outgoing tide, to get that Senko down there. Okay, there is a decent Senko bite on the inside. Okay, you can get on the inside of the lakeside, up in those shallows and grass beds there, especially if it's calm, and fish that Senko in there. Okay, you can catch some fairly decent fish further up the island above Russo's. There's some nice big openings back up in there, and there's a big long stretch. The key is don't get up too close. Those fish are 15 feet off the bank out between the docks. We all got that habit. We want to move right up in between that dock because I got this little boat and I can go where nobody else goes, and I'm going to catch that fish that all them bass boat are overlooking. Okay, well, guess what? You're not where the better quality fish. You pull up in there. If you're going to do that, pull all the way up in there and turn that boat around and fish out there. Okay, don't do that. Don't get caught. Don't follow our lead in those 18-foot bass boats and go fish all those nooks and crannies that we're overlooking, because you're really fishing dead water. Okay, you may catch a few little fish. What was the big fish today? Somebody got a 5-pounder, huh? That's good. Oh, no wonder you're leading. It was all on one fish. Jeez, you ain't as special as I thought you were. You're just lucky. Okay. Well, happy birthday. Now we know why. Okay, I get it. Cooch gets it now. Okay. And a 3-4. Oh, God. Now he's really feeling bad with his next 3 fish, huh? Both on drop shots?
I got everything on drop.
Then you just keep drop shotting and whip all their butts, okay? And don't get me wrong, drop shotting's an excellent technique. I mean, it'll catch them.
Well, Joey put me on it. just get bit on it. I haven't been getting bit on nothing else.
Yeah. Well, you will get bit on that drop shot if you fish it. But the key, I think the biggest key is having confidence out there in what you're throwing right now. And they're really, what I have found, there are really only 3 baits out in that deeper grass stuff that I can catch them. Okay, and they're eating that pretty good. I mean, I can go out there on most days, if that's what I'm fishing, those bottom bouncing baits, getting down in that grass, I can get about a 17 to 18 pound limit on a regular basis. I can catch, pardon? Half ounce on a jig, 1/4 ounce. I'm throwing a 1/4 ounce weight. Yeah, and I got a red bead on there. I didn't bring any of my plastics down. But yeah, I'm throwing the typical thing I always throw out here. I throw a black lead weight, it's painted black. I got a red bead with that little mylar flashy thing on there, okay? And that's huge for me out here at any time of the year because, you know, as that thing is bouncing down there, the sun hits that little flash, it's like a flash bulb going out off down there, and it'll trigger additional strikes. Whereas if you don't have that, you may, you know, with that, I'm getting probably 6 or 7 more bites a day just because of the flash alone on that little bead.
You haven't mentioned the Ica, I don't know how you're supposed to say it. But,
the fat Ica?
Yeah, have you used that or tried it?
You know, I kind of, the Ica for me is a lot like fishing the Senko. It's a bait that I do fish weightless. I do a lot of pitching and flipping, and I'm fishing it real slow. And it's a bait that I love to throw in the springtime when the fish are up spawning. Okay, I basically have put the Senko away. I picked it up the other day because Tony Stoltz called me one morning. He had an 8-pounder he caught down there. He got on a wall when there were a bunch of fish up, and he was throwing that big Senko, and he was out there spanking them. And he called me to come down and take a photo. So I said, well, maybe I better tie a Senko on today. All right. Lo and behold, we got out there following day and couldn't catch those fish. They were nowhere to be found. Okay. We moved back over to the island and got out in the grass beds, and we actually caught 6 fish this last Saturday doing just that. The only fish we caught were on that Senko. In about 45 minutes, we put 3 3-pounders and a couple of 2s and a couple 1.5-pound fish in the boat fishing that Senko. But what I found was I had to fish it like a Texas rigged worm. I fished it weightless. But you know, normally you throw that Senko out there and you just let it sit there, let it sit there, let it sit there. And the longer you let it sit there, thwank, they pick it up and move it off from wherever it is. If I just threw that thing up there and let it sit there, they would not eat it. I had to actually work and fish that Senko like it was a Texas rigged worm, so that it was darting and moving, darting and moving. And what I'm doing when I do that is you're triggering strikes. You know, you're keying to that natural instinct of a bass to grab something that's getting away, okay? And that's one of the other things that I can tell you, you know, when you're out there fishing these things, is fish your baits slow and methodically, cover a lot of water, but fish them very erratically, because that's the way you're going to get bites with those bottom bouncing baits right now, and those better quality fish, is by fishing that bait real erratically. Okay, I'm hopping and shaking, hopping and shaking. You know, the jig, I'm kind of getting it out there, and there was a point in time, there have actually been times where I just lifting and swimming that jig right across the top of the grass and throwing it up and letting it go down and hits the bottom, and I just lift that tip up and let that jig swim, poof! They'll hit it when it's moving. But if I take that thing, you know, and get that jig out there, and I start doing what I normally do, they won't eat that right now. Okay, what I've had to do is throw that thing out there and just go in one place and let it sit, one place and let it sit, one place and let it sit. Little small erratic hops and then pause. Little small erratic hops and then pause. Otherwise they won't eat it. I mean, that's just their nature right now, okay? You get their attention, you let it sit there, they're going to come over and look at it, and the minute you move it, pow, they grab it, okay? If you start swimming and hopping it like this, like I normally would do, trying to trigger big bites, they don't want anything to do with it. They don't want anything to do with it. And ironically, every fish that I've caught on this jig that's been over 3 pounds in the last 2 weeks has had a bluegill in its throat. I mean, that just tells you what they're eating. I mean, there are a lot of bluegill around. If you get a chance, get a good look at the color of the bluegill in the area you're in, match them. Yeah.
Yeah, same color.
Yeah. So those bass out there right now are feeding real heavily on the bluegill. Another thing that's really been working for me, I've been catching all my better quality fish the last 3 weeks on this bait right here. Okay, it's a mega stripe popper. It's a big chugger is all it is. Okay, but the cool thing about this particular bait, unlike other poppers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the regular popper too, is that it's got some holes in the side. Okay, so that water can pass through it. Okay, so it gives you a much different sound, and you don't get that bloop, bloop sound. It's more of a spitting and erratic sound. And the bait, this bait actually, you can get it to walk like a spook almost. Okay, if you do it right. But I don't fish it. I'm not fishing it that way. What I'm doing with this thing is I'm getting on the outside of the island into the main lake, positioning myself 6 to 7 feet outside the tules, casting it as far up as I can, and then just going boom, 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 push, stop. Boom, boom, push, boom, boom, stop. All the way back to the boat. And I'm fishing it. You'd think I was down in the Amazon fishing for peacock bass. Okay? I've had guys come up, sitting up in them tules, throwing their little sankles, going, Cooch, man, you're disturbing my whole area. I says, that's okay. You ain't gonna catch them throwing what you're throwing. I'm gonna catch them. Boom! 4.5 pounder swallows this thing with a vengeance. I'm fishing this thing so wild and erratic. It's the same concept. I'm having to trigger that fish to come up and eat it. Okay? I have found in the middle of this thing further down, like out in front of Russo's, from Russo's down to that wall, right out in the middle of where it's really, really clear, they'll come up out of 10 foot of water and grab this thing. You're not going to get a lot of bites. Okay? Right now, if you see air conditioning, it's not going to work. Okay? You got to wait till a little later in the afternoon. But if you got a dead calm morning, right down the middle, all the way down here, this has been working for me better out in the track when I've got a breezy chop on the water. Okay? And we've been catching some extremely nice fish doing just that with this great big chugger. I've got a couple of colors. It doesn't really seem to matter what color you use. Okay? Some of the areas that you get into, it seems to be that mid-range color. If it's real clear, I don't get bit. If it's real dirty, I don't get bit. But if I'm right in the middle, where I can look down in them tules and I can see down about a foot, foot and a half, and I can see the grass down underneath that, that's about right. That's what I'm looking for out there in that track when I'm throwing this. The other thing is that when it turns dead flat calm, okay, I'm getting 75, 80 feet off the tules and throwing it out in the middle of nowhere and catching a lot of fish. But we've had very few days like that where it's been dead calm. We had one just this last Thursday. We couldn't buy a topwater bite for whatever reason. I mean, they were out filming a Persuader video with Randy Pringle, and they're calling me up every hour going, what's going on? We can't get bit. I'm going, you know what? I'm in the same boat, guys. I had an hour window in the morning for 45 minutes where we managed to catch 8 fish. I says, we're getting a few bites on the jigs, but we're not catching anything to speak. I mean, we're catching a lot of fish like this. Okay, and it was very puzzling to me, and I couldn't figure it out. And I ended up with 11 rods on the deck, you know. And I'm getting into areas, and I'm seeing the fish, but I can't catch them. They're just sitting there. And they ain't even moving. They're just totally like it's non-existent, the world around them. You throw a jig or a Senko in them, on them, you know, normally they'll just kind of mosey right on up. They would not move. I could literally take that jig and shake it in front of their face and they wouldn't even touch it. It was just the most phenomenal thing I'd ever seen. We were down in Holland track on some Thule Islands down there, down from the marina in Holland, that island that runs down the middle down there. We saw no less than 10 bass over 8 pounds spawning. We could see them spawning on the ledges. They were on the ledges, spawning 6 feet off the Thule. As the tide would begin to drop, we could see them down there doing their thing. We tried to catch them. We got up on top of them and they just did their mosey down just like they normally do in the spring, you know. Unfortunately, when you're looking at spawning fish like that on those islands, you know, typically, you know, when they're in a shallow flat, they'll motor off and then they'll come back, okay? But when they're on them islands spawning like that, when they go down, it's over. You're never going to catch that fish because he knows you're there, and the minute you pull back and wait for them to come back up, they're okay. We're in trouble, and that's why they're spawning on those big ledges, because they can disappear instantly. I haven't seen any of that in and around here where those fish actually are spawning this last week up on them ledges in and around here. I haven't found any spawners in the track at all. But there are a lot of fish that are moving in and out of those Thules out of that grass bed. A lot of fish doing that. The other thing that has been working better than most topwater baits for me, and I know you guys throwing frogs out there too? You guys able to do that okay from the kick boats, really get out there? I mean, you make the best of it, I'm sure. This area in Frank's Track's really not, you know, the greatest area to be throwing frogs. I mean, it can be done. You can get out there and throw them, but you don't really have the really good conditions for frogging in and around the Delta here. You get on the other side of Frank's Track, you know, over by Washington Cut area, that way, a lot of good conditions, okay? You actually might find some way down in the far corner here, down in the southwest corner. You might find some of that real good frog condition down there where you can effectively fish it. Unfortunately, if you got the wind blowing, it's done. You know, you're really going to struggle trying to catch those frogfish here.
Down by Sand Mound, or?
Well, no, in the corner of the track. What you're looking for, what I have found with those frogfish, what frogfish I have been able to come up and get up have been in one of two conditions. Either A, where the cheese is just now starting to grow and the angel hair is gone. That's that stuff where you look at a grass, you look at that alodia, that coontail grass, and it looks like it's got a bonnet over its head, a nasty green yellow bonnet. Okay, if you see that, the fish aren't in that stuff. They're not in that stuff. Okay, you need to have cheese. You need to have that new fresh cheese growing that's growing in little clumps. It's around real clean grass, okay, where you can see the grass. If you see that goopy bonnet on top of that grass, you're not going to find a lot of fish in those areas. Where you'll find those fish is out on the deep drop off and the edges down at the base of it where it gets hard bottom. Okay, that's what you want. When you find it, there's a lot of areas in and around here on these islands where you can come up, or even when you pull in between the docks, you'll see where you've got that heavy, nasty, soupy stuff, okay? But most of the time, you're gonna see that stuff out in the sun, okay? Up underneath the docks, you don't have that, okay? Because that stuff thrives with light penetration. In the shade up underneath the docks, that stuff, the weeds tend to grow better. And that's all a product of the grass deteriorating. And eventually that stuff comes to the bottom, floats to the top. Then we have our cheese. That's where the cheese comes from. But that's something I can tell you to avoid. You're just not going to catch a lot of fish up on top of that stuff. You'll find more fish on the outside edge of it here in this general vicinity around the track. The other bait that I actually have probably caught more fish on the last 3 weeks than any, it hasn't caught any of the bigger fish that it normally does, but I've caught a lot of good solid 3 to 4 pound fish on this. is just a regular standard popper. And again, I'm sticking with that shad concept. I mean, this is the only color popper in this size that I use on this river. Okay, it's a chartreuse with a white back. And I mean, basically, I'm imitating the shad. What I do is I will change the feathers on this periodically, depending on whether I'm in a situation where I'm fishing specifically imitating the shad on the surface spawning. If I got areas where I got a lot of bluegill or baby bass that are in the area that are feeding on the shad, okay, I'll change this tail color. If I got a lot of bluegill, I'll put that one that's got green and orange on it. You know, real bright orange, like a fire orange and some green in it. Because what happens is when you throw that popper, and the key with this popper is throwing it out there and not moving it. You got to have dead calm. Okay, in conditions like this, very difficult to fish this popper unless you got a dead calm area. But I keep it on the deck at all times because every now and then you stumble into a little area that's calm, you whip that popper out there and you just let it sit there. Let all the rings dissipate. Kind of like fishing a Senko. The longer you let it sit there doing absolutely nothing, the more that bass can't stand it being there, not coming up and eating it. Okay? I'll let that thing sit there for 10 or 15 seconds. If he don't want to come up and eat it, or if a bluegill doesn't come up and start pecking at the feathers, that's what I want to see more than anything. I want to see those bluegill come up, and I want to see that popper sitting there going, dit, dit, dit. Okay, now I know I got somebody's attention. Okay, these bass are feeding on bluegills, guys. I've got 3 or 4 bluegills. Doop, doop, they're picking at the feathers on the back of that bait. If I got all white feathers and they're not eating it, I go to that orange feather. They'll come up and they'll start picking at that orange feather. Next thing you know, I'll just go rod tip dip. It goes doop, poosh, gone. Big swirl. 4-pounder in the boat. He's got 3 bluegills in his mouth along with my popper. Okay? It's the coolest bite on this river in the summertime. But you got to have dead calm. If it's not calm, it's just not going to happen. And the key with fishing this popper, I mean, I call it the bloop bloop. And that's exactly how I fish this. We're not on a lake. These aren't spotted bass and these aren't smallmouth. We get on them lakes with them poppers and we're going pss, 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 doing the old Zell rolling thing, you know. He trimmed back in the olden days. Well, back in the olden days, you know, all we had were those rebels. The rebel poppers, right? And what did we do with them? We threw them out there and we went bloop, just like a hula popper. Bloop, 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 and that's how we fished them way back in the olden days. Well, back in New York, Zell Rowland fished a tournament where he noticed some shad spitting around on the surface and he tried to imitate it, and he took a file and he shaved the lip off so that he wouldn't get that digging and blooping sound. He began to get this spitting sound and he started fishing it real fast and he started catching fish. And over the years, that's a technique that we've all applied fishing our poppers to. Fishing it real fast. On this river, that doesn't work. If you're going to fish a popper real fast, boop, 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 you might as well throw a buzzbait. Okay? Or pick this dude up. Okay? Pick that horny toad up. Alright? You want to fish something fast, you need to use a different bait. If you're going to fish them slow, and you want a big bite and got the patience to do it, this is the bait to be using out there right now. Okay? But the key is throw it out there, let it sit, bloop, bloop, and let it sit. Let it sit. Let it sit. Bloop, let it sit. The minute you start going bloop, bloop, pss, 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 you use it. The bloop is very important. Okay? Because the reason it is that when them shad are up there going, and them bluegill and them small bass are feeding on that shad, that's the same sound they make when they come up on the surface and grab one. You know, they got a little small mouth and it just goes. And so the bass are listening for that out there. And they hear and see a bloop, and they see something that's about 6 inches long, and we're going, oh, that's just such an easy meal, and they're going to come up and grab it. Okay? The bite right now on it is not wide open. But the bite is there, and especially out here. 2 weekends ago, that ABA tournament was won on this right here on a popper with a guy doing exactly that, 21 pounds. They never left the track. They fished all around the inside and all around the outside of the island and we had a dead calm day. A lot of guys caught popper fish that day in that tournament. Okay? This popper is a very effective tool out here, especially when the wind lays down or you get into an area that's protected and it's dead calm. You had a question? Doesn't matter. Clarity. Water clarity is most important. I've caught these fish on this popper in 6 inches of water, right up on the bank in the rocks, all the way out to 10. Okay? I mean, we've been out in the middle of the track on dead calm days, out in the middle of the track, 35 to 150 yards off the bank, and we're out there throwing bloop bloops, and we're getting fish coming up out of 8 to 9 foot of water if it's clear. Okay? The key is water clarity, not so much depth. Calm, dead water, and clarity is the key on this popper. I mentioned earlier, you know, if you want to throw something fast, these fish right now, for whatever reason, just really aren't chasing a buzzbait very well. And I think for 2 reasons. One, it's making just a whole bunch more commotion than what they're interested in. And 2, I think it's a little too big a profile of bait, especially with all the shad that are coming up. And they're keying on the smaller baits. This little dude is been pretty productive. Anybody throw this today and catch any fish? Didn't catch any, but you threw it. Okay. We threw it Thursday and didn't catch any fish either. Of course, we didn't catch any topwater fish at all. But this bait has been, it's a little different. It's kind of like that Trixie shad. Okay, and basically it's a soft plastic topwater buzzbait is what it is. I mean, that's what it imitates. But what it does is it's providing a much smaller profile. You can work it a lot slower, okay, and it makes a much more subtle sound. It's not that loud squeaky sound. It's not that loud banging clacking sound that we get on a regular typical buzzbait. Okay, it's just that real soft going across the water. They seem to be more interested in hitting this bait than any other topwater buzzbait right now. Okay, so if you want to go out there and throw some topwater, I would highly recommend to tie this bait on and chuck it, and chuck it, and chuck it. Because when they turn on that topwater bite, and that topwater bite, when that air conditioning comes on, gets better as the morning progresses. What time you guys weighing in tomorrow? 1 o'clock. Okay, so you've got a window. If it's not happening first thing in the morning, and you've already got your drop shot limit by 10 o'clock, okay? Say you're fortunate enough to do that. I would say tie this bait on and not put it down the rest of the day. What the heck? You're going to go drop shot and continue to catch the 2-pounders by that time of day. You might as well go with a high percentage big fish bait where you're going to be able to, you catch one, you're going to be able to improve your sack.
That's only in calm water, though.
No, absolutely not. You can fish this in, it can be, you betcha, man, you can fish this in rock and rolling water. I mean, you know, I wouldn't get out in the middle of the track. Okay, but if I'm in and around the docks and I'm in and around the islands, this bait's working. If it's comfortable enough to be in that kick boat and sit on the outside and amongst all the sparse tulies on the inside of the lake, then it's comfortable enough to fish this bait. You know, and a lot of times you can do is you just pull up and then get a drift. Let the wind and the current take it and just go fish. You guys know how to do that. You know how to put that to your own advantage. I don't have to tell you that. Okay, well, this is a very easy bait. If you can do that and you've got a comfortable drift, pull this bait out and throw it. And you will catch fish around them sparse tulies out there throwing this bait. Okay? I'm using, I think that's a 4-aught EWG super line. Okay? That might even be a 6 actually. Yeah, that one's a 6. I like.
The island sticking out, so it's pretty big for the thing.
Yeah, oh, well, it's a big hook, and I texpose the hook in there, okay, versus putting it in the plastic, just because they swipe at it And you get them instantly. I mean, when they grab this thing, you got them. I've had very, very few fish miss this bait. And this little brown and white doodad thing, for me, I've gone through a lot of the different colors. This one seems to be working the best for me. Yeah, black. I caught a couple fish on the black, like first thing in the morning when it was real low light conditions, and once the sun come up, they wouldn't touch it. I haven't been throwing, the only black I've been throwing is a black buzzbait with some red mylar in it with a big long black worm on the back of it, and I'm throwing that in the afternoons. They'll eat it in the afternoon, especially in the stained water. But I found in the more clear water that I'm finding around here, of all the colors, this one's been working the best for me. I had a couple buddies who were down from Idaho 2 weekends ago, Terry Battisti and his group, and the guys from SoCal come up here with him, and they got on this. They thought they were on this bite pretty good, and they were throwing that water bug color or one of the other ones, and I went out and spent 3 hours with them and picked that up. I pulled this out of the rod, and I started throwing this one, and I was catching 3 to their 1 on this bait. We're fishing the same areas, fishing the same way. You know, the water was real clear, but I was getting them 3 to 1. Color made that much of a difference to those fish. And my fish seemed to be a little bit bigger than the ones they were catching. Okay? It wasn't long before all 3 of my bags were gone. Well, they were here for the next week. That's zoom bait. Yeah, it's a zoom bait. But that's pretty cool bait. And the reason this is effective, guys, is because they haven't seen it before. It's something different. Okay? Yeah, I mean, it's something a little different. Anybody try throwing Trixie shads out there today at all? I mean, if you got the Trixie shads, it's really pretty much the same thing. A Trixie shad just is a little longer with one single tail that turns. Okay, it probably makes a lot more commotion than this thing does, which is typical of single tails versus double tails. Okay, I think because of the small double tails and the less commotion it's making on the surface, is drawing more strikes than the Trixie shad with its big tail. It's kind of the same concept when I'm throwing that jig, but just the opposite. Okay, I want that big single tail turning versus 2 smaller tails turning. Because down there where I'm fishing that jig, that big tail turning on that bait, it's creating a lot more commotion down there, and it's moving a lot more water than what 2 little tails are doing for me. And it really looks more like a bait fish. That's why I like using that grub, because it looks like a bait fish, versus in the fall when they're on crawdads, then I'll go to the double tail, because now I'm imitating the crawdad with 2 moving parts. But I think if you get using some of those ideas, change up from what you're doing, I think you're going to find you probably might catch a little better quality fish tomorrow. You know, get out of that box, guys. You know, get out of that box. I know, but you guys, if not most of you, are out behind the docks. Okay. That's really on this island in this area, not where those fish are at right now. You're going to catch a lot of the little smaller fish that are back up in there hit and miss here and there. You're going to catch them every now and then. But unless you get out in the middle, you're overlooking and missing a good group of fish. And you know, don't hesitate to drag it. If you got a Carolina rig, you know, put a beaver on a Carolina rig. Put a brush hog on a Carolina rig and just drag it down your drift. I mean, in the rules, can you guys do that? I mean, strolling in a kick boat, I mean, you know, okay, do it. Give it a try. It'll work. You know, you can put a creature on there. If you got Yamamoto creatures, put that Yamamoto creature on that Carolina rig and drag it out in the middle down. I would be willing to bet that if you kick boat and tore it all the way up as far as you could go this way and felt comfortable with, and got on the middle on the outside of them docks and just drifted all the way down with that Carolina rig, I think you'd be surprised at what your sack might look like by the time you got down to Russo's. I really think you'd be surprised. And I would be willing to bet that you guys could line up side by side and all take turns right behind one another. And I think you'd be surprised on how all of your bags would probably turn out. Okay? Yeah. But give those things a try. Get out of the box. You gotta, because it's not the same as it normally is. The typical stuff just ain't working, you know. It's post-spawn out here. These fish, the vast majority of them are done spawning. We do have some fish that are on a lingering wave that are spawning, but they're far and few between, and they're in areas where you're just not going to be able to find them right now and catch them. Yeah.
You're talking about like dead center of the channel.
Right down the middle. Yep, right down the middle.
Not like a drop-off. A lot of the just before you get to the channel.
Right.
So like that drop-off, and then it comes to like a flat, and then you get up into the weedy kind of, the more aggressive grass.
Right.
Then backing back out to the flat, you got like sporadic, and then you got the channel.
The dips. The channels, man, that's where they're at. If they're not, those fish are getting in that channel, and you've got, where it comes like this, you've got a little dip in the center. And those fish are suspended right on the edge of that dip, and they're just sitting there because that's where the least amount of current flow is right now for them. If you got an area that's current. And then what they'll do is they'll move up, and they'll come over to that sparse clump of grass. So they could be anywhere in that zone from where the bottom of that grass line is to the center of that channel. And you just kind of go back and forth till you figure out exactly what it is, where they're at and what they're doing, and then you stay on that line. Okay, you can come into some of these areas, like I mentioned, there's a really good area right down there out in front of Sugar Barge that just it's got sparse grass with that channel that I'm talking about, and it's got variations where the structure it changes. It goes 5, 6, 4 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot, and it's right on the outside of that grass, and that slopes down all the way out in the middle of that channel where it turns into 16 foot. And I'm finding those fish in that whole zone. You know, certain times of the tide, when the tide is up, I tend to find them a little closer to the grass line. As that tide begins to drop, they tend to move a little deeper. Okay? They're not going all the way up into the grass and the tules. They're staying out in that deep, calmer water. Okay? The other thing is that water down there is a lot clearer than what you see up above. You'd be surprised because of the flow coming in and out of that track. Okay, and all that muddy water. You can go in and look at all these openings here. When that water starts to come back in, you'll see that the water at the mouth of that area in a lot of cases is kind of dirty.
Yeah.
You know, and that's all from the outgoing tide that's drawing all that dirt and mud off the tule points and out into the track. Okay, and then it comes and filters right back through. Okay, if you got a lot of wind, it's going to get dirtier and dirtier and dirtier because things are getting worked up. So the openings, and basically that stained dirty water is just right on top. It's a mud line is all it is, okay? And how we fish mud lines on the lakes, we love that kind of stuff. Late in the afternoon when you get a mud line on the lake, you catch a lot of fish because it acts as a canopy. It stops that light penetration coming down. Those fish get up underneath it. They do the same thing here. Around those openings is probably where you're going to find more of those better quality fish out in the middle.